Well, hi, everyone, and welcome on into another edition of Trump 2.0. This is the show that will take a look at everything happening in Washington, D.C. through the lens of this second Trump administration, because we all know, frankly, for the next 4 years, that's essentially how everything in Washington, D.C. is going to be framed. And joining me to do that again this week, my good friends David Brody and Dan Andros. David Brody, of course, CBN News chief political analyst, and Dan Andros, host of the CBN podcast Quick Start. Gentlemen, my goodness, I've got my sleeves rolled up. All right, so we're ready to go because what a year this week has been. Let's start off with the most recent news to come down the pike, and that, of course, is the plane crash near Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. You had a Black Hawk helicopter crash with an American Airlines flight just seconds before it was set to touch down at Reagan National Airport. Obviously, we've all been praying for the victims, and the investigation is now ongoing. The NTSB is on the scene, and it's their ball now. So they're going to be taking a look at people. They're going to be taking a look at equipment. They're going to be taking a look at conditions to see what exactly happened. How is it that more than 60 souls lost their lives in a crash that certainly should have been preventable? Nothing like this should ever happen. But one of the things that we saw this week was President Trump, of course, offering his condolences to the victims, but also in the news conference talked about perhaps some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion policies put in place by the Obama and Biden administrations, he claims may have had something to do with it. And of course, that has been getting some fierce blowback from Democrats who are saying that he's engaging in conspiracy theory and that he's speculating on something far too soon during the course of the investigation. So David, let me send this to you first. Do you see what Donald Trump is doing as healthy speculation? Is it important that we're looking in this direction, or is it politicizing a tragedy too soon?
Well, look, I mean, Donald Trump is his own person, as we know, is his own man. He's going to do it on his timing. It's unconventional. I think a lot of people would have preferred that 24 to 48, 72 hours of waiting and then get into that. But that's not Trump. He's just not going to do it. And so I think people are really having a problem, quite frankly, with the timing of it, number one. I mean, they have problems with the content of what he's saying, too. But I think they just have a problem, first and foremost, of the timing of it. And so, look, everybody can decide, whether or not that was appropriate or not. But having said that, in terms of the actual content, he's definitely onto something. And once again, that's not analysis, that's just fact. I mean, in 2015, Obama changed the FAA guidelines. I mean, he called for a biographical test specifically. So I can go into all of this here, but there are collegiate training institutes, right? And that's where the air traffic controllers come from typically. But in 2015, Obama's folks said, you know what, we're not going to really look at this merit-based system so much because you went to an institute. We're going to actually take folks off the street. That was the word at the time, off the street, and we're going to give them a biographical test. In other words, tell us a little bit more about your story. It was definitely more DEI, even though it wasn't called DEI back in 2015. And so this was the beginning of some of the concerns that folks were having in the conservative world about what was going on at the FAA. And then Biden, of course, we know some of those guidelines that was there on the website at the time from Biden as it relates to psychological disabilities. And even Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary at the time, said that he wanted to increase those type of jobs within the FAA to 3%. Now, does that mean air traffic controllers for 3%? No, it doesn't mean that. But the point is DEI is alive and well. So Trump is on to something. I think the timing is really the issue. And look, I think beyond that, we can get into the understaffed portion of this at the FAA, specifically at Reagan National, where they're supposed to have about 30 air traffic controllers overall at Reagan National. They have 19 right now, so they're understaffed. And there's so many other questions. But in terms of the DEI, he's definitely onto something. And one thing I've learned about Donald Trump is that a lot of people will laugh and say, oh, and snicker and go, oh, come on, this is ridiculous. It's not this, it's not that. And then it turns out that 70, 80, 90, he would say 100% of the time, he's right. So let's just wait and see how this all shakes out. And to be clear, I just want to say one last thing before heading over to Dan on this. The media went with headlines. I looked this morning. Just look them up. Just Google it. Type in Trump and DEI. You will see the New York Times with a headline. Trump blames the crash on DEI. Politico, DEI. Trump blames DEI. That's not what he said. He never said that. He said it could be DEI. And then later in the Oval Office yesterday, he said, well, we're not sure. It could be, it might not be. But you're not getting that balance. But here at CBN News, the truth matters. So we're going to give you exactly what he said and give you the context, Dan Andros.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. And to your point, David, I mean, I think like you said, this is just Trump's just not going to do this. But I agree that it would have been, this close to a tragedy. We don't have exactly what caused it yet. I mean, I think both things can be true at the same time, that this DEI issue is a big problem within a lot of areas of the federal government, including the FAA. And that can be an issue, but we don't know specifically what happened on this particular crash. And so by him, going into that really in depth on that issue, while he may not have said it directly caused it, I mean, it certainly leaves the impression that that's what he's saying. So, yes. Given that he did them at the same time. So the timing, I just, personally, I would have liked to see those separated, because I think it's a discussion worth having. A friend of mine, Stu Bergier over at The Blaze, our friends there, he had a documentary just a few months ago called Countdown to the Next Aviation Disaster. It's up on his X page right now if you want to check that out. The full thing is up there. But they basically go through all of this stuff and say, like, what is going on here? And they go through all the hiring practices and how they took away some of these standards, included this, sort of, like you said, that personality test or whatever they called it, to basically essentially get to what is your cultural background. And they factored that into these hirings. So those answers, those questions need to be answered. Like what has happened to places like the FAA and government offices where there has been this big DEI focus? What has been the extent of it? But we also don't know what happened in this particular crash. So right. I think both things are worth, that is worth discussing. That is worth going into for sure. But I think while we don't have all the facts on this particular crash, maybe it would have been better and more effective to wait. But, like you said, Trump has a way of getting these things going and making the narratives happen. And that's certainly what the narrative is right now.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, with a crash like this, a natural disaster, or not a natural disaster, a man-made disaster like this, but any kind of disaster like this is you want to make sure it doesn't happen again. So how do you do that? You do that by figuring out exactly what happened. And certainly the NTSB is going to do that. There will certainly be internal investigations with the FAA, with Reagan Airport. They're all going to be taking a look at what happened here. And it's clear that just 24 hours before this incident happened at Reagan National Airport, there was a near miss incident. The Washington Post reported that a plane that was on arrival had to pull up and and reroute a second time because a helicopter was near the landing zone. So you had also reports that there was inside the air control tower that there was actually one person who was doing the job of two people directing helicopters and commercial flights. So there's clearly something going on here. Whether it has something to do with DEI directly and whether or not DEI is a problem in aviation and around the country and in the U.S. government overall, those are absolutely conversations that are worth having. And I think the Trump administration certainly is engaged in that. And that was my whole thing, is I want to make sure that whatever comes of this, that the actual solutions are come to the forefront, and we're not distracted by an issue that may have something to do with this, may not have something to do with this, and to keep the messaging focused on getting to the solution of the problem.
I don't think we're going to be distracted. Help me out John, on your philosophy on that, or your analysis on that. How are we distracted? I mean, you can do two things at the same time. I mean, so Trump put it out that DEI could be an issue, and it could be. And then, but hang on for a second. Then the NTSB and all the investigations are going to go on as normal anyhow. If Trump said it or didn't say it, how does that affect the investigations? I guess is my question.
Well, what I don't know, why not just wait until the investigation is over? And if it seems as though staffing has been an issue, if it seems like people are unqualified in these positions because of the hiring practices, an executive order at that point or a policy put into place at that point would seem to make sense to me. It's just the order of things I don't think makes a whole lot of sense.
And that gets back to my original point, which is the timing. People don't like the timing. People like to be conventional about it. He's not conventional. He's unconventional, and he's going to throw things out. I mean, he's a guy that's going to say, hey, look, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that. Here's some tinfoil here, here's some tinfoil there. No. You know what I'm saying? I mean, this is him. So if you don't like the style, I think your issue is more with the style. I don't think it's actually with unless did you say, I didn't know if you said earlier that it's not DEI. Did you say that? Maybe you didn't say that. I don't know.
No, I didn't say one way or the other. I didn't say
I'm
one
sorry.
way or the other. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, just because the investigation is in its infancy right now, and we'll see how this all plays out.
And guys, he walked into a little bit of I felt like he kind of walked into a little bit of a trap on this press conference, because he was going on for a while about the DEI problem. And then someone asked him, well, then is it safe to fly? Because the impression was like, well, DEI has messed up this thing so bad. Obviously, we're going to have a crash like this. And then he said, yeah, it's safe to fly. Like, well, those two didn't really line up to me. Like, I mean, DEI can be a problem. It can be safe to fly. And we don't know what happened with this crash yet. So I think the way he was sort of framing it, I think he left himself open to that. Like, it did make it sound like, well, if we have this DEI problem and that, the implication is it led to an accident like this, then should we just be grounding flights right now until we get this DEI problem cleared up?
Yeah, but he was all. I see what you're saying, Dan. That makes sense, kind of on its face. I'll just say this: that what Trump was saying is the reason he was saying it was safe to fly is because these are very rare occurrences. So even if DEI is an issue, it's still a rare occurrence. I mean, it's not like therefore 30% of flights are going to crash in the United States. I mean, because of DEI. I mean, he wasn't suggesting that, and no one was. So I think that I do understand the argument there, but it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things from this week that we're taking. I think we're not going to the funding freeze and some of the messaging from the White House has been a little bit of it. I don't know. There's been some confusion on different things during the course of this last week with messaging, and that's to be expected. Second week in a new administration, that there could be some issues, and maybe not. There might be there might be people who are totally understand exactly what the Trump administration is going for here. Let's move on to the hearings this week. There were obviously 3 potential cabinet officials, who were up for their nomination hearings this week, and certainly some popcorn eaten viewing, as if you were into these hearings this week. Let's start off with RFK Jr. He was actually before 2 committees this week. First before the Senate Finance Committee, and then before the Senate Help Committee on Thursday, and he went after senators for some. Claims of corruption on their part. He had a tense exchange with Bernie Sanders on Thursday, claiming that Bernie Sanders takes money from big pharma and other pharmaceutical companies. Really, at the heart of this, really, it comes down to one Republican senator, David, it seems to me, and that's Senator Bill Cassidy, right? He needs to get Bill Cassidy on his side. Bill Cassidy is a medical doctor, and he was really asking RFK Jr. to clarify his position on the link between vaccines and autism. Do you think that RFK Jr. did enough to convince maybe any holdout Republican senators who might be wary of his position on vaccines, autism, and anything else about his personal life to make it through the Finance Committee and then to the full House, to the full Senate?
80%, 90%. I think so. I mean, I'm not saying it was a stellar performance. I mean, he's going to be criticized. I thought the style was a little rough from RFK. But having said that, you're right, John. You're right on the money. Bill Cassidy is the ball game in town. He's got to get Bill Cassidy, who's the head of the Health Committee, in essence. There, he's got to get that. And will he get it? We think he will. I say we, as in we pundits, I guess. We like I hang around with pundits every day. But we think he will. But we're not positive. Having said that, if I'm a betting man, and I'm not, I would say that RFK does get through. We'll go on to Kash and Tulsi in a moment, but Dan, that's kind of where I'm at on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll, at the end of the day, get through as well, even though, like you were saying, that it wasn't a perfect performance by any stretch. I thought there were a couple moments. One that stood out to me, because I didn't get to see the entire thing. I watched a lot of it, but the one moment with Elizabeth Warren, who, generally is one of these ones that, goes for the grandstanding and whatnot. But she did kind of press him on this idea about, and I'd love to get your reaction on this one, David, but on suing the big drug companies and stuff. And she said, will you promise not to take a fee while you're, in this position and, benefit financially from suing these companies? And he said, well, what you're saying is to tell me not to sue them. She's saying, no, you can sue him as many times as you want. I'm just saying don't get a fee for it. Don't financially prosecute. And he just kept going back to, well, I'm not going to not sue them. And it was a rare win for, I thought, Elizabeth Warren on that moment. I mean, unless I'm missing something on that, I just couldn't understand why he wouldn't just say, yeah, no, I won't profit on that. It certainly left the appearance that he just either didn't understand the question or, was trying to dance around it and didn't do a good job. But he hit on a lot of big points, though, that were, key sort of rallying cries on the right. When it comes to, vaccines and being able to have personal autonomy on these things. I mean, that's a big issue. And I think Americans are still sort of jilted about what happened during COVID with these people being fired from their jobs, particularly in government positions, if you weren't taking the jab. And it's like that kind of thing is very personal, very raw to people. And when he comes forward on this and he's championing that, regardless of all these other, side things that might pop up on it, I think he's going to have a lot of momentum just based on that.
Well, I thought he split the difference. John, I'd be curious to get your take. I thought he split the difference. He was trying to say to Elizabeth Warren, well, yeah, I'm not going to take any money while I'm HHS secretary, but I'm not going to make any bets after that.
Right.
So, I mean, it kind of made sense. I mean, I think to the layman, at least, it made sense. I mean, I don't want to call it his livelihood, but this is what he's done his whole life. I mean, he's a litigation guy. He's in court all the time. He's suing these drug companies, and he's not going to, all of a sudden say, I'm done with that because Elizabeth Warren told me to.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I get the concern of somebody being in a position of power and using that position of power to put wheels in motion, put things in motion that will benefit them financially or benefit friends financially after their time in the government. And certainly, I think that's what Elizabeth Warren was hitting at there. I also see the point. RFK Jr. has made his living doing a lot of the things that they kind of want him to do as Secretary of HHS. And so, you can, if that's a true concern, then you'd have to find someone who wouldn't be able to benefit financially in anything in the health field at all.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
As HHS secretary. And maybe that person's out there, but how qualified is that person? I don't know that particular line was I hear what you're saying. And I think,
that's a fair point.
He would have done better to kind of just say what, Senator Warren wanted him to say. But I think on RFK's defense with vaccines and autism, no matter where you come down on that issue, he didn't backtrack. He did say, he believes in the childhood vaccine schedule, but he didn't disavow his past comments. And I don't agree with his past comments, but he wasn't telling people telling them what they wanted to hear at the hearing.
Yeah, and I will say that before we go to David there on that, I will say that in these hearings on either side of the issue, there's obvious moments where they're like Elizabeth Warren there are just trying to get you to say something. Right. And like, you just know in your head, probably like, okay, yes or no, like, and they're just trying to like walk you into this corner. And it's like, under any circumstances, you're just saying, I am not going to just say what they want me to say because they're trying to walk me into a trap here. So I totally get that. That's the game they play in these things. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Well, and a quick, very important note here. I'll just take 20 seconds on this, but he defended President Trump's pro-life policies and said that they would implement those, and that he said it's important that we take a look at the safety of the abortion pill, mifepristone. To me, that's pretty significant. We kind of knew he was going to say that going in, but the fact that he said it in front of the committee is important because, let's be honest, the way he would really not be able to get confirmed and get tanked if the pro-life community would come out against him, because at that point you got a lot of pro-life senators that would be a very hard vote for them if he was saying things that were the antithesis of President Trump's pro-life views, which of course he's not going to do. So he did a good job there.
Let's move on to the Tulsi Gabbard hearing for Director of National Intelligence. And here it seems maybe there are more headwinds. Republican Senator James Lankford, who had previously said that he would back her, said afterwards that there are a lot of questions now about her. Specifically, he was going back and forth with her, trying to get her to say that Edward Snowden was a traitor. She has defended what Edward Snowden has done in the past, and she refused to do that. Republican Senator John Curtis of Utah said the hearing had deepened my concerns about her judgment. Republican Senator Todd Young also clashed with Gabbard over Edward Snowden. He said, I've got, for now at least, all the information I need. And then Republican Senator Josh Hawley on Fox News warned that I'm worried that her nomination may be in jeopardy. So, David, it sure seems like there are more Republicans who are more on the fence and maybe even outright in opposition to Tulsi Gabbard becoming the director of national intelligence. Is that your read as well?
He's in trouble. Yeah. I mean, look, you're going to lose McConnell. You're going to lose Murkowski. You're going to lose Collins. That takes you to 50. That brings J.D. Vance into the seat to break the tie. But the problem is that for Tulsi Gabbard, she probably has a fourth senator against her, maybe a fifth, possibly even a sixth. Todd Young could be one for sure. I know there's some others, but you mentioned Langford and others. I think ultimately they'll back her. I think Todd Young could be that fourth senator from Indiana, Todd Young from Indiana, that actually does not go for her. So we'll see. I think it'll be tough. Having said that, I thought she did really well. I mean, in terms of the best she could do under those circumstances. I mean, she's really swimming upstream here, right? I mean, this is talk about. It's not just populism and Trump and a mandate. This is like literally going against everything Republicans have talked about for years and years on national security ever since 9/11. So I think she's going to have some tough sledding to do.
Well, yeah, and this kind of comes at a time, like you said, David. Like does seem to be an upheaval of norms within Republican line of thinking on a lot of issues. Like you're getting more into this whole like just we just need to go away completely, eject entirely from any foreign funding for any foreign country. Let alone engaging in any wars of any kind or any military action of any kind. So you've got this like total shift going on. And so, will it fully, matriculate here during this, with Tulsi Gabbard? I don't know. Like you said, you got people still on both sides of the old sort of guard Republican and the new. And so when the dust settles, it'll be interesting to see where it lands. But yeah, echoing what you said about it's murky right now for. And
there's a lot of steps here too. Real quick, John. I mean, it's not just Edward Snowden, right? I mean, it's FISA and 720, or Section 720, right? I mean, you've got some of what she said about Russia. Of course, Bashar al-Assad in Syria and the meeting there. And there's more. There's a whole lot more. So it's one hurdle after another, and I think it could be, in a way, kind of political death by 1,000 paper cuts here. I think that could be the concern if you're Tulsi Gabbard. So.
And quickly, let's finish up with Kash Patel, Donald Trump's nominee for FBI director. He was confronted by Democrats as to whether he would have an enemies list of Trump political enemies to go after if he was head of the FBI. One thing I thought was of note that he said he opposed Trump's mass clemency of January 6th defendants. However, Democrats on the committee were saying that a lot of those comments about the January 6th defendants were disingenuous. They claimed he helped raise money for January 6th defendants. And the Democrats were saying, essentially making the argument, you're saying things now that we like, but they're contrary to some of the things you've been saying over the last 3 or 4 years on podcasts and in the media and in other places. Dan, let me throw this one at you first. With Kash Patel, that line of, I think if you haven't been following him and his career and some of the things that he has said, you might not be able to grasp everything the Democrats are going for here with regards to trying to compare past language to present language. Watching his hearing, does it seem to you like he's got the path forward?
Certainly did to me. I mean, you're always going to find yourself in a few pickles in these hearings. I mean, especially someone like him who's been out talking on podcasts and things like that. They're going to find and just get any little contradiction or thing they can dig up. But I thought he did a good job. I mean, he seemed to have a real good command of things going on, and explaining his past positions. I thought he did a good job overall. Particularly on that January 6th issue, like you said, I was kind of, eyebrows went up a little bit when he said that, because, a lot of the people in some of these hearings, have just kind of wanted to distance from that and just kind of move forward. But he did say it like, hey, anybody who's assaulting an officer, I'm not for that. And, I wouldn't wouldn't grant, clemency to that person. So, that and other interactions, I thought generally, I thought he did a good job, David.
Yeah, I thought he did a great job. And I know Kash. I mean, I'll do a disclaimer. I've known Kash for many years, we've been in contact, kind of behind the scenes a little bit as to what's happening there. Look, no, he did a great job. Look, here's the thing. He was in a tough spot on that January 6th stuff. I mean, he had to give that answer. I mean, he really did. I mean, you can't be the head of the FBI and say I'm okay with violence against law enforcement. So, right. I mean, he had to, excuse me. So he had to say the commutations part of it. He had to say, I'm not for that. So that was the tough spot he was in. Having said that, excuse me, I'm all choked up. It's emotional. No, it's not. Excuse me. I'm just getting older. I'm like the old guy now at the, but anyhow, look, we talked about RFK Jr. being 80%. Kash Patel's going to be 100%. He's getting through. There's no doubt about it. So if we're going odds, we're going Kash Patel 100, RFK 80, Tulsi Gabbard 40, 30 maybe.
Yeah, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley was vehemently in support of Patel, and most of the Republicans, if not all the Republicans on the committee and in the Senate, believe the FBI needs a complete overhaul and needs a complete shakeup, something that Kash Patel has promised that he would do. And so we expect next week for these nominations to be brought up in the committees, and then if and when they clear the committees, they'll be brought to the full Senate. But of course, like you mentioned, if Gabbard doesn't have the votes, it won't go through the committee. They won't take it up. I mean, maybe they will, but I think, you'll whip those counts and you'll see, listen, if this goes through committee, it's not getting through. Maybe you pull your name out before the vote takes place, but we'll see how the machinations in Washington work next week. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of things. So the process, and you guys know this, but the process will be, so there'll be a vote on Tulsi Gabbard. Let's just talk with Tulsi Gabbard for a second, deal with her. If she does not get through committee, they can have a separate vote then to basically bring her to the Senate floor without recommendation. That would be the second vote. Now, at that point, you would think, well, they just rejected her. So how in the world are a couple of Republicans, whoever does that on the committee, like a Susan Collins and others, going to now say, okay, I'll vote for her without recommendation? But it could happen. And at that point, it does go to the Senate floor. And then at that point, you see if you get 50 votes. But I think that would be tough. I do want to say one thing on a separate note. Can we change these Senate confirmation hearings? I mean, oh my gosh. These people with their opening statements, we gotta limit them to 2 minutes. Send a PDF file with all your gobbledygook, and do your 9-minute PDF. Look, even if you want to do it, get a podcast mic and record it. I don't care. Put a wave attachment. I don't care. But stop wasting our time. 2 minutes is enough. And oh, by the way, enough with these rhetorical questions that everybody asks, right? They have 5 minutes and they ask a 4.5-minute rhetorical question.
They're never wanting to. It's auditions, David. They're auditioning for. They're trying to get a viral clip. It's so ridiculous.
And that's my point, which is that I'm done with it. And so, can we just install a buzzer? Here's what I think should happen. Okay, and a trapdoor. Here's what I think should happen. I literally think that the question from each senator should be no more than 45 seconds. They should have a clock. 45 seconds, you get a question. And if you are past 45 seconds, the nominee has a buzzer. And they literally stop, and their mic is cut off. The senator's mic's cut off, and they speak. And, of course, we can have a trapdoor as well. Could you imagine the must-see TV that would be? Oh, now that would be good. I pay for that.
I mean, maybe can I add to your idea, David, real quick?
Sure.
I mean, what if we created an AI droid or something, and everyone had to submit their questions ahead of time, and the AI droid then just perfectly, asked the right questions and tried to, ask the toughest questions at the toughest time. And,
I love it.
You could attribute it, right? And then you just have to. So then there wouldn't be the droid doesn't care if he gets a viral clip, right? So you got to just saying.
I like that.
Clearly, improvements can be made to these confirmation hearings, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. But we will be keeping an eye out on the news with regard to these nominees, and of course, everything that's going on in Washington, D.C. Over the course of the next week, until we chat again through the lens of the Trump presidency here on Trump 2.0. David Brody, Dan Andros, thanks for joining me once again.
Thanks, guys.
All right.